Good morning, Connecting Point family. It is Friday, and so I hope your guys' week has been going well. I hope that you are ready for the weekend because it's here, ready or not. And I hope that, like me this morning, you have found yourself maybe with a furthered perspective of the life that we are called to as Christians. And so, as is my privilege on Fridays, I'm going to share some thoughts, some wonderings out of our Following Jesus Bible reading plan from the YouVersion Bible app that we are working through as a church. And today we had some reading in First Chronicles and Proverbs and First Corinthians. And the focus of our conversation today is going to kind of bring together our reading from First Corinthians as well as our reading from Proverbs. And so when I was reading / having the app read to me as I followed along in my Bible, one of the Proverbs really caught my attention, and it was specifically Proverbs 19 verse 20, and it says, "Listen to advice and accept discipline, and at the end you will be counted among the wise." And when I read that, it just wouldn't leave me alone, and I think it wouldn't leave me alone because if I am honest, those are some things that I don't necessarily love to do. I like being somebody with answers. I like being somebody who knows what he's doing. And I think maybe many of us can agree with that, at least in some respect. And so while I don't necessarily deny the advice of others, I can definitely say that I have a hard time accepting the discipline of others, because it's just uncomfortable. It puts me in a very humbling place. Puts us in a very humbling place in times when we weren't necessarily expecting to be humbled. And so that's uncomfortable. And for some reason, that verse just really stuck out to me. I don't know why. Maybe it's that I need to be listening to some advice or accept some discipline right now in my life. But that really stuck out to me. And then this idea of if you do these things, you will be counted among the wise. Like this wise thing grabbed my attention as well. In the column I wrote that we are to be listening and assuming a posture of humility. And so, I have that, and then fast forward, right, because I hadn't yet read First Corinthians as that was sticking out to me and as I was starting to process through that. But then fast forward now, and we get to Corinthians, and if we think about where we have been these past couple of days, Paul is talking about is having a conversation with those at Corinth about wisdom and about foolishness and about how there is a difference between worldly wisdom and godly wisdom, and about how the worldly wisdom is really, if we're honest and quite frank with each other, it's wisdom that we still struggle with today. This American dream wisdom where we strive to better ourselves. We do whatever it takes to make more so we can do more, so we can buy more, so we can have more, whether it's possessions, power, influence, whatever. It's this idea of kind of clawing our way to the top for respect and clout, influence, whatever you want to say. So that's like the worldly wisdom that was already an issue back in biblical times, maybe even more so in some respects, and in other respects, maybe more so today. And that's being contrasted with the wisdom of God, which is actually the gospel, which is actually the way of Jesus, which is the way of the cross, which is the way of humility and suffering and sacrifice and submission. And so Paul has already been having this conversation of wisdom and its connection with humility, true wisdom and its connection to humility, if I'm referring back to the proverb. But fast forward into our reading for today, and we have this chapter 4. And there was another verse that really stuck out to me, and it was verse 1 of chapter 4. And it says, "This then is how you ought to regard us." So Paul is telling the people, like, this is how you need to look at us. This is what you need to think of us as. And he says that we are servants of Christ. And as I thought, like, I had to stop right there. And I just wanted to spend some time thinking about what that means. And as I thought about that more, I just gradually became more and more blown away about the implications of what Paul is saying. Because if we think about this honestly, Jesus himself, in the gospel, specifically in the Gospel of Luke, when he is at the Last Supper and he is talking to his disciples, he tells them that I am among you as one who serves. I am here as a servant. And then he doesn't just say it, but he goes and he does it. He backs up his words with actions, and he takes off his outer garments, wraps a towel around his waist, and goes and kneels at the feet of every single one of his disciples, washing them. Washing them. In that moment, Jesus was assuming the lowest position that you could have in that room. And so Paul here saying that he is to be regarded as a servant of Christ, immediately what went through my mind is Paul is saying I am to be understood as a servant of the servants. And when we put it in that context, it's like, oh my goodness, like, this whole idea of humility is a constant theme. So I was thinking, wisdom was this constant theme, but this idea of humility is just as prevalent throughout this conversation in 1 Corinthians as well as in Proverbs. This idea that Paul is saying, man, can you even fathom that? I'm even having a hard time getting the words out to explain what's going on in my mind as I think about what it means to be a servant of the servants. The servant. The one who perfectly modeled what it looks like to be a servant. We are to be his servant. Like that, I'm having a hard time even computing what that looks like and what that means. And so I don't know, as I think about that, and as I think about the proverb, and as I think about what I just confessed to you guys about how, I have a hard time at times accepting discipline or receiving advice from others, perhaps this is the answer right here. That as we assume the position of being a servant of the servants, we find ourselves in a place where we are better able to receive advice and accept the discipline of those around us, because we have gotten to a place where we think so little of ourselves and so much more of those around us. Perhaps this is the very place that we as Christians have to find ourselves so that we may be transformed into the likeness of God. I mean, that is what our life's journey is about, right? Like, God is working in us and is transforming us into his glory. And his glory was perfectly reflected through the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. And so if we recognize that as the ultimate trajectory that our life is supposed to be on, perhaps this posture of humility where we find ourselves as a servant of these servants is like this starting point where we are finally in the place where we are finally humble enough to be prepared to receive the advice and correction of those around us, as well as the advice and correction of our Heavenly Father. So that way, when God begins to call things to our attention, when those around us begin to point out maybe inconsistencies that exist in our life to the life that we desire to live in pursuit of Christ, we can humbly receive them and allow them to transform us more and more into His image. And so maybe this title of a servant of the servant is the title that we should be pursuing. A thing that is contrary to the wisdom of the world, right? Because the wisdom of the world would tell us that we need to be clawing our way to the top. But the wisdom of God says that we need to be crawling our way to the bottom. Paul says it nicely in verse 10 of 1 Corinthians 4 when he says, we are fools for Christ. And he doesn't say fools because he is saying that he is foolish, but he says that we are fools because of that designation that the world around us gives to the wisdom that we live by, which is a wisdom of humility and suffering and selflessness. And so today, maybe these devotional thoughts were more just for me than anybody else, but I feel like I had to share them. But today I hope that you would find yourself in a place where you can truly say that you are a servant of the servants. That you would find yourself in a place where you have assumed this posture of humility and you are opening yourself up to advice and correction from those around you, advice and discipline from those around you and from our Father in heaven. All for the glory of God, right? All so that way we may be more and more transformed into His image, that we may bring more and more glory to His name as we live in this world, as we serve in this world. So perhaps the blessing that I can speak over you this morning as you get your day started is go and be a fool for Christ today. Peace out.